April 1816. Miss Rosalind Whitfield clutched the gilt-edged invitation to the Royal Spring Ball between trembling fingers. Even in the privacy of her bedchamber, she feared someone might snatch away this unexpected opportunity, her last chance to secure a respectable match before her third and final season expired. "It simply makes no mathematical sense," she murmured, setting the invitation beside the ledger where she dutifully tracked her dwindling prospects. At 22, she was practically ancient by society's reckoning. Yet somehow, her younger sister Lydia had managed to secure no fewer than 3 proposals before Easter. Rosalind's practical mind had long ago calculated the odds. Ladies of exceptional beauty or extraordinary fortune married well. Ladies possessing neither, like herself, might secure a decent match through charm, wit, or family connections. But Rosalind had committed the unpardonable sin of being unremarkable in every way, neither beautiful nor hideous, neither wealthy nor destitute, neither brilliant in conversation nor embarrassingly dull. She was simply forgettable. Marriage is merely a mathematical equation, she reminded herself, a mantra she had repeated since her first disappointing season. One must simply identify the variables and solve accordingly. Her aunt burst into the room without knocking. "Have you seen it? The invitation? Your mother is beside herself with joy." "Indeed, Aunt Beatrice." Rosalind gestured to the cream-colored card. "Though I cannot imagine why we were included. Father's naval connections hardly place us among the ton." "Do not question Providence, my dear. This is your chance. Your last chance, if I may be blunt." Aunt Beatrice, never one to disguise her thoughts behind social niceties, plopped herself onto Rosalind's bed. "Though you must promise not to hide behind potted palms or bury your nose in some scientific journal." "I have never hidden behind potted palms," Rosalind protested weakly. "The Duke of Wellington's birthday celebration? You spent the entire evening discussing the propagation of ferns with Lord Ashbury's ancient botanist uncle." Rosalind flushed. "He was the only person who spoke to me all evening." "Because you positioned yourself beside the most withered specimen in the room. Men want wives, not gardeners." Aunt Beatrice sighed dramatically. "Promise me you will make an effort. Your father cannot support you forever, and I dare say you don't wish to become my companion when I am old and grey." "I shall try," Rosalind promised, though she knew her efforts would likely yield the same disappointing results. In the harsh calculus of the marriage market, she had already determined her value. She was a zero-sum, not worth noticing. His Royal Highness, Prince Zachary of Denmark. The announcement sent ripples of excitement through the already dazzling ballroom. Rosalind, positioned deliberately away from any horticultural displays at her aunt's insistence, watched as the assembly parted like the Red Sea. "Goodness, I had no idea we would be in the presence of actual royalty," her mother whispered, frantically adjusting Rosalind's modest pearl necklace. "Though I suppose it's a royal ball, so one should expect, well, royalty." Rosalind craned her neck but could see little beyond a tall figure surrounded by a fluttering cloud of débutantes. "Is he visiting on diplomatic business? Who cares why he's here?" Lydia, resplendent in pale blue silk, bounced on her toes. "He's unmarried and reportedly handsome as sin. Every eligible lady will be vying for his attention." "Then I need not concern myself," Rosalind replied practically. "If the most accomplished beauties in London cannot capture his interest, I certainly shan't register in his awareness." Lydia patted her sister's arm. "Don't be glum, Rosie. Perhaps there's a nice baron or viscount who might find your mathematical proclivities charming." But as the evening progressed, Rosalind found herself abandoned even by her family. Lydia was quickly claimed for every dance, her mother engaged in strategic conversation with influential matrons, and her father ensconced with fellow military men discussing Napoleon's defeat. Even Aunt Beatrice had found companionship among the dowagers. Rosalind sipped her lukewarm punch and observed the mathematical precision of the dance, the ordered patterns, the predictable progressions. She had always found comfort in certainty, in problems that could be solved through logical application. People were far messier, far less predictable. "Excuse me, is this seat occupied?" Rosalind nearly spilled her punch. The gentleman before her was tall, with eyes the precise blue-green shade of the Mediterranean Sea as illustrated in her father's atlas. His dark hair curled slightly at his temples, and his formal attire, though impeccable, seemed to sit upon him with a casual elegance few could achieve. "No, sir. It is quite vacant, as am I." The moment the words escaped her lips, she flushed. "That is to say, I am not engaged in conversation, not that I am vacant of intellect." His smile deepened. "I should hope not. Empty heads make for dreadfully dull conversation." "Then you are safe with me, sir," she replied, recovering slightly. "My head is unfortunately cluttered with all manner of impractical knowledge." "How fascinating! What sort of impractical knowledge do you harbor?" She hesitated, calculating the risk of honesty versus the safety of bland pleasantries. "I am particularly interested in mathematics and celestial navigation. My father was a naval captain, you see, and he taught me to chart courses using the stars." Instead of the polite withdrawal she expected, his eyes brightened. "Indeed? I have some interest in astronomy myself, though I confess my knowledge is that of an enthusiast rather than a scholar." "You needn't be modest, sir. I am hardly a scholar myself. And yet you can navigate by the stars. Most gentlemen of my acquaintance can barely navigate from their clubs to their homes after an evening of excess." He leaned slightly closer. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I am Zachary." A striking blonde in a gown that must have cost a small fortune appeared at his elbow. "There you are. The Duchess of Pembroke has been looking everywhere for you." He straightened, his expression cooling. "Lady Caroline. You'll forgive me, but I am presently engaged in conversation." Lady Caroline's gaze swept over Rosalind with such swift dismissal that Rosalind felt herself mathematically reduced to less than zero. "Oh, I didn't realize." "Well, you mustn't keep the Duchess waiting. She's quite determined to introduce you to her niece." After a moment's hesitation, he bowed to Rosalind. "Forgive the interruption. Perhaps we might continue our discussion later." "Of course," Rosalind replied, though she knew with certainty that the later would never come. Men like him did not return to women like her. It was a simple equation. As he was led away, Rosalind noticed the deference with which others treated him, the way conversations halted as he passed. With a sudden shock of realization, she connected his name to the royal announcement. The gentleman who had shown interest in celestial navigation was none other than Prince Zachary of Denmark. And she had prattled on about mathematics like some blue-stocking spinster. Mortification burned through her. She would need to avoid him for the remainder of the evening, a task that should prove simple enough, given her talent for fading into the background. 3 hours later, Rosalind had succeeded admirably in her goal of invisibility. She had danced exactly once, with her father's elderly friend Admiral Jenkins, who stepped on her toes and reminisced about naval battles throughout the quadrille. Otherwise, she had been left to observe the glittering assembly from increasingly peripheral locations. She now found herself in a small antechamber adjacent to the ballroom, examining a collection of celestial maps that decorated the walls. The room was blessedly empty, the music from the ball muted to a distant hum. The cartographer made several errors in the positioning of the Lesser Ursa, a voice observed from behind her. Rosalind whirled to find Prince Zachary standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Your Highness." She dropped into a hasty curtsy. "Forgive me, I didn't realize that I would seek you out after being dragged away by Lady Caroline." His smile was wry. "I'm afraid I've spent the last several hours trying to escape an endless parade of introductions to eligible young ladies." "You seem to have succeeded admirably, sir." "Temporarily. They'll find me eventually, they always do." He moved to stand beside her, studying the star chart. "You didn't tell me your name earlier." "Rosalind Whitfield, Your Highness." "Miss Whitfield." He tested her name as if tasting a new wine. "You were correct about my being modest earlier. I know precisely nothing about celestial navigation. I merely wish to continue our conversation." Rosalind blinked. "Why?" The directness of her question seemed to surprise him. "Because you were the only person in that ballroom not looking at me as though I were a prize stallion at auction." A startled laugh escaped her. "I wouldn't have addressed you at all had I realized who you were." "Precisely." He gestured to the star chart. "Now, enlighten me about these errors. I should like to be able to navigate home should I ever find myself stranded at sea." For the next quarter hour, Rosalind forgot herself entirely, explaining the principles of celestial navigation with genuine enthusiasm. Prince Zachary asked intelligent questions and listened with apparent interest, and she found herself relaxing in his presence. "You explain complex concepts with remarkable clarity," he said when she paused. "I almost believe I could chart a course now." "I wouldn't advise testing that theory immediately, Your Highness. The Thames is not the open ocean." He laughed, the sound unexpectedly warm. "Sensible advice. Tell me, Miss Whitfield, why are you hiding in here rather than enjoying the ball?" The question brought her sharply back to reality. "I'm not hiding. I merely found these charts of interest." "As did I." "What a fortunate coincidence." His tone suggested he didn't believe in coincidences. "Would you do me the honor of returning to the ballroom? The next set is about to begin." Alarm coursed through her. "Your Highness, I couldn't possibly dance with me." "Why not?" "Because everyone will stare. Because I am nobody of consequence. Because," she stopped, mortified by her own honesty. His expression softened. "Miss Whitfield, I have danced with a dozen ladies this evening, all of whom simpered and flattered and didn't say a single genuine word. I should very much like to dance with someone who can speak intelligently about navigation while calling me out on my astronomical ignorance." Before she could formulate a logical refusal, he offered his arm. Logic warred with longing. One dance with a prince would not change her life's trajectory. Tomorrow, she would still be the forgettable Miss Whitfield. But tonight, just for one dance, she might pretend otherwise. She placed her hand lightly on his arm. "I should warn you, Your Highness, that I calculate dance patterns mathematically. I am told it makes me appear somewhat mechanical." "I find that precision in movement can be quite elegant," he replied as he led her toward the ballroom. "Though perhaps you might occasionally allow for a slight miscalculation. I hear spontaneity can be exhilarating." As they entered the ballroom, the expected wave of stares and whispers washed over them. Rosalind felt her posture stiffening, her movements becoming more precise as they took their places for the waltz. Prince Zachary, however, seemed utterly indifferent to the attention. "Relax," he murmured as he placed his hand at her waist. "They're merely calculating how quickly the news will spread that I've chosen to dance with the most intriguing woman in the room. You needn't flatter me, Your Highness." I am well aware of my position in the social hierarchy. And what position would that be? The music began, and he guided her into the first turn with surprising grace for a man of his height. Statistically insignificant, she replied. A data point that doesn't affect the overall outcome. His brows drew together. Is that truly how you see yourself? As a mathematical anomaly. Not an anomaly. An average. Thoroughly unremarkable in every measurable quality. Then your measuring instruments are faulty. His hand tightened slightly at her waist as he guided her through a turn. I find you remarkably direct, unusually intelligent, and refreshingly honest, all qualities in short supply in ballrooms. Rosalind stumbled slightly, thrown off by his words rather than the dance steps. Your Highness is too kind. Zachary, he corrected. And I assure you, kindness is not among my notable virtues. Ask any of my advisers. As the dance continued, Rosalind became aware of Lady Caroline's venomous glare, of her sister's open-mouthed astonishment, of her mother's barely contained excitement. For once, she was not invisible, and the sensation was terrifying. Everyone is watching us, she whispered. Let them. Perhaps they'll learn something. What could they possibly learn from watching us dance? His eyes, those sea-colored eyes, held hers with unexpected intensity. That the most valuable treasures aren't always the most obvious. The music ended before she could formulate a response. Prince Zachary bowed formally, then straightened with a mischievous smile. I believe I'm expected to circulate, but I'd very much like to continue our conversation later. Perhaps during supper? She managed a nod, still bewildered by the turn of events. As he walked away, she was immediately surrounded by curious ladies, including her own sister. What did you say to him? Lydia demanded. How did you manage to secure a dance with the prince? I discussed celestial navigation, Rosalind admitted. Lady Caroline, who had insinuated herself into the circle, laughed sharply. How perfectly tedious. No wonder he escaped as quickly as possible. On the contrary, Rosalind replied with more confidence than she felt, he has asked to continue our conversation over supper. The disbelief on Lady Caroline's face was almost worth the anxiety churning in Rosalind's stomach. Almost. Supper proved to be an exercise in advanced social warfare. Zachary had indeed claimed the seat beside Rosalind, but they were surrounded by the highest-ranking members of society, all of whom seemed determined to redirect his attention. Lady Caroline, positioned strategically opposite, made it her mission to interject whenever Rosalind spoke. So tell me, Miss Whitfield, Lady Caroline said with saccharine sweetness, what does your father do? I don't believe I've encountered your family before. My father was a captain in His Majesty's Navy, Rosalind replied. He served with distinction under Admiral Nelson. How quaint. Lady Caroline's smile didn't reach her eyes. And now he attends royal balls? The Navy must pay better than I realized. Rosalind felt Zachary stiffen beside her. Before he could speak, she placed her hand lightly on the tablecloth near, but not touching, his. My father's naval pension is indeed modest, she replied calmly. However, his innovations in navigational equipment have proven quite profitable. He holds several patents. Fascinating, Zachary said, seizing the opening. Captain Whitfield, I'd be most interested to hear about these innovations. The Danish Navy has been seeking to improve their navigational accuracy. As her father launched enthusiastically into an explanation of his modified sextant, Rosalind caught Zachary's subtle wink. He had deliberately redirected the conversation to safer waters, allowing her father to shine while neutralizing Lady Caroline's attack. When the meal concluded, Zachary stood and offered Rosalind his arm. Miss Whitfield, would you care to view the conservatory? I'm told the night-blooming cereus may flower this evening. Aware of the dozens of eyes tracking their movement, Rosalind placed her hand on his arm. I should be delighted, Your Highness. As they strolled away, she heard Lady Caroline's cutting remark, how extraordinary that he should take such interest in a nobody. It must be pity. Zachary's jaw tightened, but Rosalind squeezed his arm gently. It doesn't signify, she murmured. Her calculations are based on incomplete data. His expression eased into a smile. You truly do quantify everything, don't you? It makes the world more comprehensible. The conservatory was mercifully empty, the guests still engaged in supper or returning to the ballroom for the next set of dances. Moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling, casting silver patterns across exotic blooms. No Sirius tonight, I'm afraid, Zachary observed, guiding her along a winding path fragrant with jasmine. Though the deception served its purpose. Which was? To speak with you privately, without the entire British aristocracy monitoring our conversation. He stopped beside a small fountain, the gentle splash of water providing cover for quiet words. Miss Whitfield, Rosalind, I must be direct. My time in London is limited, and I find myself unusually concerned with how I spend it. Rosalind's heart stuttered. I wouldn't wish to impose on Your Highness's schedule, please. When we are alone, at least, call me Zachary. He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its careful arrangement. I came to England ostensibly for diplomatic purposes, but in truth, I was sent to find a suitable bride. The words landed like stones, sinking through the momentary fantasy Rosalind had allowed herself to entertain. Of course. A marriage alliance. Political, practical, powerful. The perfect mathematical equation. I understand, she said carefully. That explains the extraordinary attention from every eligible lady this evening. And their mothers, he added ruefully. I've been paraded before more prospective brides than I can count, each one more accomplished, more beautiful, more suitable than the last. I'm certain you'll make a wise selection. The variables are straightforward: lineage, dowry, connections, appearance. She trailed off, aware that she possessed none of these advantages in any significant measure. That's precisely the problem. Zachary stepped closer. By those variables, I should choose Lady Caroline or one of a dozen others. Yet I find myself unable to generate any enthusiasm for the prospect. Perhaps you require additional data points, Rosalind suggested, desperately maintaining her analytical demeanor though her pulse raced at his proximity. Indeed. His voice lowered. Variables like intelligence, honesty, the ability to make me laugh, to challenge my thinking, to see me as a man rather than a title. Those are difficult qualities to measure. And yet I've measured them quite effectively in the few hours of our acquaintance. He took her hand, his touch sending a wholly unscientific thrill through her. Rosalind, would you permit me to call on you tomorrow? She stared at him, searching for the jest, the hidden motive, the cruel punchline that must surely follow. Why? Because in a roomful of diamonds, I find myself drawn to the only uncut gem, one whose true value is apparent only to those who look beyond the surface. You barely know me, she protested. I know enough to wish to know more. His thumb traced a small circle on her palm. Will you give me that chance? Before she could answer, the conservatory door opened, admitting a rush of music and voices. Zachary released her hand but remained standing close. There you are. Aunt Beatrice's voice carried across the greenery. Rosalind, your mother is beside herself. It's most improper to disappear with, she stopped abruptly as Zachary turned to face her. Your Highness. I beg your pardon. I didn't realize. No apology necessary, madam, Zachary replied smoothly. Miss Whitfield was kind enough to discuss botanical specimens with me, but you're quite right, we should return to the ballroom. As they followed Aunt Beatrice, who kept glancing back as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing, Zachary whispered, "You haven't answered my question." "Yes," Rosalind whispered back. "Though I cannot imagine what your advisers will say. They'll say exactly what they always say, that I'm impulsive, reckless, and entirely too independent for a crown prince." His smile was infectious. "And for once, I won't argue with them." True to his word, Zachary called the following afternoon. And the next. And the next. Each visit caused a greater sensation in Rosalind's modest neighborhood, with crowds gathering to glimpse the Danish prince's carriage outside the Whitfield residence. On the fourth day, Rosalind found herself walking with Zachary in her father's small garden, chaperoned at a discreet distance by Aunt Beatrice, who pretended great interest in the spring plantings. "Your aunt is the least subtle chaperone I've ever encountered," Zachary observed, amusement coloring his voice. "She's humming loudly whenever we speak softly. She believes it gives us privacy while maintaining propriety." Rosalind smiled. "A mathematical impossibility, but I appreciate her effort." They strolled in comfortable silence for a moment before Zachary said, "I received a letter from my father this morning." Rosalind's stomach tightened. "The king wishes you to return to Denmark." "Eventually, yes. But first, he's coming to London. Apparently, news of my unusual attention to an unknown English lady has reached Copenhagen." "Oh dear." Rosalind stopped walking, her mind racing through the implications. "He must be displeased. I'm hardly the alliance he would have chosen." "On the contrary." Zachary's eyes crinkled at the corners. "He's curious to meet the woman who has apparently bewitched his notoriously selective son." His exact words were, "She must be extraordinary indeed if you've ignored a dozen suitable princesses to court her." "But I'm not extraordinary," Rosalind protested. "That's the problem. I'm entirely ordinary in every measurable way." Zachary caught her hands in his. "Stop calculating your worth as if you were a commodity on the marriage market. You are extraordinary to me." Behind them, Aunt Beatrice's humming grew louder as she pretended fascination with a rather unremarkable rose bush. "Your father will be disappointed when he meets me," Rosalind insisted. "I disagree. But there is one way to be certain." Zachary's expression grew serious. "Come to the palace ball tomorrow evening. Let me present you properly, not just to my father, but to all of London society." "Another ball." Rosalind's voice faltered. "Zachary, I barely survived the last one. This will be different." He squeezed her hands gently. "Trust me." Trust. Such a simple word for such a complex equation. To trust was to risk, to venture beyond the safety of proven formulae into the unknown variables of the heart. "Very well," she agreed softly. "Though I shall require more substantial armor than my best gown." "You'll need no armor," Zachary promised. "Not while I stand beside you." The palace ballroom made the previous venue seem modest by comparison. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, gilt moldings, and the jewel-adorned elite of British society. Rosalind entered on her father's arm, her mother and sister following, all of them wide-eyed at the splendor. "There's Lady Caroline," Lydia whispered, nodding toward a cluster of elegantly dressed ladies near the dais. "She's watching you like a hawk eyes a mouse." "Thank you for that comforting observation," Rosalind murmured, though she had already calculated the probability of a confrontation at 97%. They had scarcely reached the center of the ballroom when the majordomo announced, "His Royal Highness, King Frederick of Denmark, and His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Zachary." The assembly parted as father and son entered. The king was a distinguished man of perhaps 60, his bearing regal despite his shorter stature. Beside him, Zachary looked even more handsome than Rosalind remembered, his formal attire including several impressive decorations and a ceremonial sword. The pair moved through the crowd, greeting key diplomats and nobles. Rosalind observed the pattern of their progress and determined that they would reach her family's position in approximately 7 minutes, assuming constant velocity. Her mathematical precision failed her, however, when Zachary suddenly broke away from his father's side and made directly for her, ignoring several attempted interceptions by important personages. "Miss Whitfield." He bowed formally before her, then straightened with a smile that transformed his regal countenance into the warmer expression she had come to treasure. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, Your Highness," she replied, aware that dozens of pairs of eyes were now fixed upon them. "Though I believe you're disrupting the expected protocol by speaking to me before greeting the Duke of Wellington." "The Duke will forgive me. He understands the imperative of securing one's strategic objectives." Zachary offered his arm. "Will you permit me to present you to my father?" A ripple of shocked whispers followed them as Zachary led her toward the king, who was watching the proceedings with evident curiosity. "Father," Zachary said in a carrying voice, "may I present Miss Rosalind Whitfield, daughter of Captain James Whitfield of His Majesty's Royal Navy." Rosalind sank into the deepest curtsy she could manage without toppling over. "Rise, Miss Whitfield," the king said in accented but clear English. "I have heard much about you from my son." "I hope not too much, Your Majesty," she replied before she could stop herself. The king's eyebrows rose, then he laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Zachary said you were forthright. I see he did not exaggerate. Miss Whitfield possesses many admirable qualities, father." Zachary's gaze never left Rosalind's face. Intelligence, courage, honesty, and the rare ability to see beyond titles to the person beneath. The king studied them both for a long moment. "Interesting. Most interesting. We shall speak more later, Miss Whitfield. For now, I believe my son wishes to claim a dance." As the king moved away to greet the British dignitaries, Zachary led Rosalind toward the dance floor. "That went well," he murmured. "Did it? I couldn't tell. The variables were unfamiliar." His smile deepened. "Trust me, if he had disapproved, you would know. My father is not known for concealing his opinions." The orchestra struck up a waltz, and Zachary drew her into his arms with practiced ease. As they began to move through the figures of the dance, Rosalind became acutely aware that they were the only couple on the floor. The entire assembly stood watching. "Zachary," she whispered urgently, "why is no one else dancing?" "Because I requested a moment alone with you before the evening progresses." His expression grew serious. "Rosalind, I need to ask you something important." Her heart began to pound with such force she was certain he must feel it through their joined hands. "This seems an unusually public venue for an important question. I've never been known for my subtlety." He guided her through a turn, his movements fluid and confident. "Rosalind Whitfield, in the brief time I've known you, you've completely recalculated my understanding of what matters in life." "That sounds mathematically improbable," she managed, though her voice trembled. "And yet undeniably true. I came to London seeking a suitable alliance and found instead a connection I never thought possible." The music swelled as he continued, "My father has given his blessing, which means I am free to follow my heart rather than diplomatic expedients." They had reached the center of the ballroom. Zachary stopped dancing, though the music continued, and took both her hands in his. Around them, the crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath. "Rosalind, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Not because you are suitable or advantageous or politically expedient, but because you are exactly who you are, the only woman who makes me feel seen rather than merely observed. The world seemed to contract to a single point of focus, Zachary's eyes, earnest and hopeful, watching her with an intensity that defied calculation. "This defies all mathematical probability," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. "Some equations transcend logic," he replied. "Love among them." Love. The word hung between them, weightless yet more substantial than any formula Rosalind had ever studied. "Yes," she said finally, joy bubbling up from some previously undiscovered well within her. "Yes, I will marry you, though I cannot promise to stop thinking in mathematical terms." His smile could have illuminated the darkest night. "I would expect nothing less. Your analytical mind is part of what makes you extraordinary." As he drew her close and brushed his lips chastely across her knuckles, the most public display of affection propriety would allow, the ballroom erupted in a mixture of applause and astonished whispers. At the edge of the crowd, Lady Caroline looked as though she had swallowed something particularly unpleasant. King Frederick approached, beaming. "It appears my son has made his choice, and a wise one at that. Welcome to our family, Miss Whitfield." As the orchestra resumed playing and other couples joined them on the dance floor, Rosalind found herself surrounded by people who had previously looked through her as if she were invisible. Now they offered congratulations, compliments, and invitations as if she had always been worthy of their notice. "How quickly the variables change," she murmured as Zachary reclaimed her for another dance. "The variables haven't changed," he corrected gently. "Only their perception of them. You have always been valuable, Rosalind. They simply lack the wisdom to recognize it." As they whirled across the floor, the center of all attention, Rosalind finally understood. The equation had never been about her value in society's marketplace. It had been about finding the one person whose calculations matched her own, who saw beyond the surface to the complex, beautiful truth beneath. In the glittering ballroom where she had once been invisible, Prince Zachary had whispered the words that reframed her entire understanding, "You are the one I choose." And in that choice, she had found not just a prince, but a future where she was seen, valued, and loved for exactly who she was. Perhaps love was not a mathematical equation after all. Or perhaps it was the most elegant formula of all, the perfect balance of two hearts finding their complement in one another, defying all probability yet proving, in the end, to be the only solution that truly mattered.